Good evening. I'm Pat Healy from the Laker News. For those who might not know, the Laker News is an online news website covering East-Hants, the Fall River, and Beaverbank areas. You can find us at thelaker.ca. I will be the host of the live stream for the East Hampton District's Chamber of Commerce and the Laker News live stream of the Kings-Hants Federal Candidates Forum. Before we officially begin, I want to acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq. The following Federal Candidates Forum, in partnership with the East Hampton District Chamber of Commerce, is to provide residents of Kings-Hants a chance to hear answers from our federal candidates that have joined us here tonight for the September 20th federal election. The live stream on the Laker News Facebook and on Dagley Media's YouTube is courtesy of our good friend Matt Dagley from Dagley Media in Lower Sackville. On sound, we have Daniel McKenzie, and Stephen King is our moderator. I'd also like to thank the East Hants Chamber of Commerce, Stacy and Tracy, for all their hard work in organizing this. I'd also like to thank my friend Dr. Strang for the tie I'm wearing. Now, let's have Chamber President Glenn Irving join us with a message.
Thanks, Pat. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's federal candidates debate. Hard to believe it was only a month ago that we were here with the provincial candidates, and now it's time for a federal election. As most of you know, East Hants Chamber of Commerce is helping to showcase this very important event. I also want to make mention some of the key figures who are participating behind the scenes. Pat alluded to these people as well. But of course, I want to thank Pat and the Laker News for his help in organizing the event, alongside Dagley Media for streaming this live to all our audience out there. It's been great working with all you guys on both these debates that we've been doing. I want to thank one of our past presidents, Stacey Ingram, and our chamber coordinator, Tracy Williams, for putting together the questions. I can assure you the candidates have not been given any advance notice. And one of our executive board members, Sherry Williams, will be looking after the time clock and keeping our candidates in check. The East Hants Chamber of Commerce has been operating since 1986, and we're proud to be going into our 35th year as a nonprofit organization. Our core focus continues to be on the community business growth and providing a collective voice for business owners. I encourage all businesses, large, small, and just starting up, to get involved with the chamber, or any chamber for that matter. We are here to help connect you with other businesses and to take advantage of business education skills training that most of us offer. Our moderator for tonight's debate, Mr. Stephen King, I want to extend our appreciation for your help in volunteering tonight. We look forward to your guidance and steady expertise in providing our candidates their blow-by-blow questions. And finally, I want to thank the candidates that are here tonight who are taking part in this upcoming election. The debate platform is very important, and it's a great way for our candidates to have their say and respond to the questions and concerns being voiced by our community. I wish all of you the very best as we enter into the last few rounds of this political arena. It's always great to see that we have strong representation here in Kings-Hants, not to mention Nova Scotia. For all those listening in, please make sure you get out there and vote. So let's have a clean debate, everybody. Let's get ready to rumble. Over to you, Pat.
All right, so while we give some time to get the one of the candidates situated with the mic, let's do a little introduction. On my right, Cody Blois, the Liberal candidate. Mark Parent, the Conservative candidate. Stephen Schneider, the NDP candidate. And Sheila Richardson, the Green Party candidate. So with those housekeeping duties over, now let's get started. Stephen, the mic is yours.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Welcome, candidates. Welcome to East Hants. Here's how the event's going to work. The order of candidates has already been determined and will rotate with each new question. There will be 12 rounds of questions. Each of the candidates will have 1 minute, 30 seconds to provide an answer. The timekeeper will hold up the sign at the 1 minute mark and then a second sign at the 1 minute, 20-second mark. At 1 minute, 30 seconds, the mic will be shut off. Then the next candidate to the right will answer the question. Each round should be approximately 7 minutes. If there are no questions, let's get started with the first question. And Cody, you won the draw to go first. And the first question is, why do you think it was important to have a federal election before the pandemic ended?
Get into the first question. I thought-
Okay, I guess there
I'm
is a
happy to
2 minute
answer it,
opening.
but-
I wanted to get right into those questions, so we got through them all, but by all means, each candidate has 2 minutes as part of their opening comments.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Stephen, for moderating tonight. Thank you to Pat and Matt involved with the media production, and of course, all of the volunteers with the East-Hants Chamber of Commerce for putting on this debate and allowing us to be able to engage as candidates, and of course, for those that are watching at home to be able to take an interest. So thank you for those that are watching. I've had the privilege of being your member of parliament for the past 2 years after taking over from Scott Bryson. And for those of you that don't know me, some of my background, I grew up here in East-Hants. My father was a truck driver, my mom an administrative assistant. She still works at Maple Ridge. Some of you may know her, and that's Shelley. My connection to community at a young age was through sport. I'm a former draft pick of the Halifax Mooseheads. I got back involved in coaching minor sport here in East-Hants, and that led me to starting 2 different nonprofit organizations. One was the Come Home East-Hants Association, which is Tidefest, although we haven't been able to have a Tidefest for quite some time, and the East-Hants Sport Heritage Society. I also took a commerce degree from St. Mary's University, went on to be a practicing lawyer, and then, of course, decided to put my name into the political ring when Scott Bryson decided not to reoffer. The fact that we're doing this debate here today in a virtual format, of course, respecting COVID rules, really demonstrates what we've all gone through over the past 2 years. I don't think anyone could have anticipated what we would have gone through. But when I look at the government response, it was not perfect, but it was strong. The fact that we had individual supports for those that were impacted work-wise, we had business supports for those businesses that were impacted, and of course, we are one of the most vaccinated countries in the world, which is a testament to the government's response. Of course, this election gives us an opportunity to talk about the issues in the days ahead that are extremely important. I'm hearing housing, healthcare, seniors, and climate, and I look forward to exchanging with my candidates tonight. Thank you.
Mark?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen and Pat and Matt and Stacy and Tracy. It's a real pleasure to be here with the Eastern Kings and District Chamber of Commerce and the Laker News hosting this event, and I appreciate this opportunity. My name is Mark Parent, and rather than spending time introducing myself and my history, since I think that was contained in an article in the Laker News, I'd like to share very quickly with you the reasons why I'm running to be your next Member of Parliament. And it's the same reasons that I've been getting consistently at the door as I've been hopping on my e-bike and riding through Milford and Lance and Enfield and Elmsdale. It's frustrations about the growing divisions within our country, pitting region against region and groups against groups, and the lack of pride in who we are as Canadians. It's anxiety about economic stability and job opportunities, both for the present and also for the future. I'm running for my grandchildren, worry about what sort of economic situation they'll inherit. It's a weariness that I'm hearing at the door, and a Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who consistently seems to put his own interests above the interests of the country, as evidenced by an unnecessary election in the middle of the Delta 4 variant in this COVID pandemic, when our politicians instead should be focusing on arresting a declining economy, as the news came out that we declined by 1% recently, helping free our citizens who are in Afghanistan, and combating the effects of climate change, which affects us all. And we had a good debate about that just the other day. Well, speaking of climate change, speaking of change, it's, I believe, a time for change. And that's why I'm running. and I look forward to this debate.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen?
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks to the Kings-Hants Chamber of Commerce for putting this on. My name is Steve Schneider. I'm the NDP candidate for Kings-Hants. I live in Wolfville with my wife, Meg, and my daughter, Evangeline, and I teach criminology at St. Mary's University, and I'm a nationally recognized expert in organized crime and crime prevention, but my true passion is community development, which is one of the reasons why I entered politics. I'm a big believer in public service and community service. I worked in inner city communities across Canada and the United States for years. And I currently am on the board of the Wolfville Children's Center, and I coach Acadian minor basketball, and I have a tutoring mentoring program with Indigenous kids in Glooscap. So we're going through pretty much 4 crises in Nova Scotia right now: housing, healthcare, COVID, of course, and the climate crisis. And people are telling me in the door that it's so hard to keep up now. Wages are stagnating while costs continue to rise. It's harder to find a good job, a good union job with a livable wage, good benefits. It's harder to find health care. Students are leaving university with massive debt. And of course, the crisis, climate, and COVID. Some of the issues that I want to tackle as an MP is to, first of all, help coordinate our strategy to address climate change and making sure that we contribute to a provincial and national plan. Trying to promote economic innovation in all the riding, throughout the riding, helping to address healthcare by promoting more collaborative care and more nurse practitioners. We want to create more affordable housing, more long-term care beds. I want to continue with my after-school programs, catering to marginalized children, Indigenous children, helping seasonal workers find EI benefits, and also helping First Nations in this riding with reconciliation, with treaty rights, of course, maximizing vaccination rates, and helping small businesses. And finally, I'd like to do everything possible to avoid another federal election for another 4 years. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Sheila?
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Sheila Richardson. I'm representing the Green Party of Canada in Kings-Hants. I'll tell you something about myself. I have a master's in education from Dalhousie University, and I was an adult educator, a counselor, and a community developer, and then a mediator. Prior to that, I was teaching in Northern Ireland and England for 9 years, and I was head of geography of a large comprehensive. I have 2 children, Christopher and Sarah. We came here in 1985, so I guess we're immigrants. Christopher recently went to Victoria in British Columbia, and Sarah's in Hatchet Lake in Halifax. I live in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, myself. I love it there. And I had cancer in 2006. I was diagnosed November 2006. And at that point, when I ran federally, I said I wanted clean air, clean water, and clean food, because my son looked up the statistics and said that Nova Scotia had the highest rates of cancer all across Canada, and could be attributed to the spraying, budworm spray, and also the agricultural spraying in Wolfville. I think they sprayed potatoes 16 times. So I guess I got quite knowledgeable about spraying. I'm a continuing care assistant. I took the exam in 2018, and I work with seniors. I enable them to stay in the home as long as possible. I've worked privately for 10 years, and I've worked with agencies for 10 years. Enough about me.
Thank you, Sheila. Now we can start the questions. And I think you've all heard the first one, but I'll say it one more time. Question 1, Cody, you're going first with this one. Why do you think it was important to have a federal election before the pandemic ended?
So when I look back to October of 2019 and when I had the privilege of being elected, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I don't think anyone could have anticipated that we were just about to go through a global pandemic. And when I think about things as simple as Zoom, for example, I didn't even know what Zoom was. And here we are doing meetings. In fact, we just held a national parliament in Zoom form as I sat at my kitchen table and was able to bring the views of and the perspectives of people from Kings-Hants to the table. We are on the back end of this pandemic. Yes, we have to be mindful of a fourth wave, but the fact that we have that many people vaccinated puts us in a strong position. I think it's a good opportunity to be able to examine the issues. All the candidates just talked about what they're hearing on the doorsteps. It's a good opportunity for us to refocus and ask ourselves, what are the issues that we have to tackle on the back end of this pandemic? I also had the privilege of sitting in the House for 2 years. And although, of course, in the early days, there is usually great cooperation in a partisan sense, I found particularly at the end, key bills around conversion therapy, around getting supports out to Canadians were being delayed in the House by a number of delay tactics that maybe everyday Canadians don't see. But the Parliament was not as functional as it could have been. We need to be able to move forward. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to address the issues that Canadians deserve in the days ahead.
Thank you, Cody. Mark?
Well, I don't think we need a federal election. Certainly our party didn't call the federal election. It was called by Justin Trudeau. And it was absolutely unnecessary. He called it in order to get a majority. There was a working minority. The NDP had indicated that they would support him. There would be no confidence measure that he wouldn't pass with the help of the NDP. He could have finished out the 4-year term, no problem. But he wants a majority. Justin Trudeau wants a majority. And so he called this election. And the evidence that he wants a majority and that he's not too concerned about COVID and the impacts of COVID is that it's the shortest election possible. The chief electoral officer called for, if you have to have an election, which they didn't recommend, have the longest one possible so we can get safety measures in place, so we can allow students to vote on campus as they did before, have the 59 days. Instead, we have the shortest election possible in the middle of a COVID pandemic with Delta 4 coming out. And frankly, I'm a little annoyed by it and worried about it, as all parties should be, because we all have to get our workers out there helping, putting them at risk, putting voters at risk. And it's an absolutely unnecessary election to feed Justin Trudeau's desire to have a majority.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen?
When I'm at the door, you hear a whole range of frustrations that people have: the price of housing, cost of food, not being able to get a job, the climate crisis. But always in the end, you hear, and why are we having this election? I'm so frustrated that we're having this election. And I think the Liberals obviously took a calculated risk, and it blew up in their face when you look at the poll numbers and the anger that's guarded towards the Prime Minister, although I condemn wholeheartedly all the violence and that's been directed at him. That certainly should not be part of this campaign. But political parties forget that they're a means to an end, not an end in themselves. It's not about power. It's about change. It's about community development. You know, I'm running for office not because I want just power for the sake of power. If I wanted power, I sure as hell wouldn't be running for the NDP. I'll put it that way. Parliament was functional. We were passing legislation. We passed the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. We passed C12 climate change legislation. So people are frustrated, and I think that what this shows is the need for electoral reform in this country, that for a prime minister to call an election on a whim 2 years into a mandate, a prime minister that promised years ago that we'd have electoral reform and reneged on that. Again, this is another example of the need for electoral reform in this country.
Thank you, Stephen. Sheila?
Okay. I don't think that we really need an election right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's very hard to knock on doors. I have been wearing a mask and I have been going. Some of the debates are virtual and some of them, this one's in person, but we have to abide by the protocol of 6 feet distance and masks. After that, it's a rainy night and I'm sure people stayed home. Personally, I ran in Fairview, Clayton Park provincially, so the federal election was called on the Sunday and the election day for the province was on Tuesday. So it's very hard to do back-to-back elections. We're in Nova Scotia disadvantaged because we've just had a provincial election and now we're going into a federal election. I think there are a lot of people who have been affected by the pandemic. During COVID-19, we asked, what is a life worth? 15,000 seniors died during the pandemic. Hate crimes are on the rise. What will we do to end them? Thousands of Indigenous children have been discovered in unmarked graves across the country. How will we atone for this tragedy? I guess I have to finish.
Question 2, Mark, you'll be the first one to answer question 2. During COVID-19, when government agencies restricted or suspended services and programs, charitable and not-for-profit organizations stepped in to fill the gaps, yet their budget resources remain the same. The East-Hants Family Resource Center, for example, has not received an increase in funding since 2016. How will your party support the charitable and not-for-profit sector serving East-Hants?
Thank you very much for that question. And certainly it's near and dear to my heart because that's where I worked for most of my life, in the nonprofit sector. And I understand the importance of it. When I was a provincial MLA and later cabinet minister, I kept hammering home to my colleagues that when they talk about small businesses, large businesses, when they talk about workers, unions, et cetera, don't forget the nonprofit organizations. So I was pleased to see that the Conservative Party is putting $150 million towards helping with nonprofits deal with mental health issues. And that money will be going to nonprofits who are working in the fields of wellness and mental health, as many of them are, helping them to fund themselves in order to do the extensive work that they do. One other thing that is not in the party platform, but I think we need to look at it very seriously, and that's tax reform in order to benefit nonprofit organizations. I've always sort of smiled that political parties, particularly on the federal level, on the provincial level, get 75% tax credits. Federally, they get 75% up to $500, but only nonprofits, when you give to a nonprofit charitable organization, it's only about a 25% tax credit. So I think that's one way that the federal government can help, and I'll certainly be advocating that.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen.
We've indeed seen charities and nonprofits step up and fill a void that governments have left for years. I mean, we appreciate so much what they've done, but in many instances, these charities shouldn't even be here because many of the services they provide show a glaring gap in the failures of government. I volunteer with food banks, and every day they say we shouldn't even be here. Why do we have food banks? We should have food security. Government should be providing people with the income, with the support, so they don't have to go to food banks. Now, with that said, in the near future, we're going to need charities. I work with charities. I'm on the board of charities. They fill an invaluable role. I certainly agree with Mark that we need to increase charitable tax credits far beyond what we give. I mean, it should be the same level as the charitable or the tax credit we get for giving to political parties. So I'm very much in favor of increasing tax credits and very much in favor of doing everything possible to support direct funding from government to charities. But I think the most important thing we need to do is we need government to step up to the plate and start doing its job to make sure we don't have food banks and we don't have services for at-risk kids, after-school programs run by the charities. So the next government needs to seriously address the many broken strands in our social safety net.
Thank you, Stephen. Sheila.
Okay, so my issue when I first started in politics was childcare. So I was a childcare advocate, and we did Thelma Edmonds and myself did a needs assessment on how to start up a family home childcare. We needed subsidized spaces, we thought. We lobbied 4 ministers, community services ministers, and finally we're given 10 subsidized spaces. And I believe it should be universal and free. And I believe if we want women in the workforce, and 60% of the women are in the workforce, so then I believe that childcare should be there available for every child that needs it. And what we did was I presented a brief to the Senate on childcare in 1987. And one of our actions was, it was the Brian Mulroney government. But one of the actions that we did was we baked cookies in a childcare center. We sent them to Ottawa, to government, for them to sell the cookies, to make the money to run their programs. Because that's basically what you're asking a lot of programs to do. Have bake sales and ask for charity money, when actually it should be a fully funded program. And if you look at it, we could actually tax the corporations. We could actually tax the wealthy, and we would be able to provide those programs. It's very important to say that. I know, you finished. It's a passion. It's very important to say that we fund things properly, and that other things that we do fund shouldn't be getting priority. I see it as priority.
Thank you, Sheila. Cody.
So first of all, thank you to all the folks at the East-Hants Family Resource Center for the work that they do. Of course, a lot of their connection into government funding is through the provincial stream, but I just want to highlight some of the work that did go on during the height of the pandemic. We introduced what was called the Community Emergency Support Fund. It was over $500 million that went directly to nonprofit and charities that were doing important work on the front lines of COVID. Of course, we had the emergency wage subsidy that was available for those charities and nonprofits whose employees were being impacted such that they could keep people on the payroll to keep their important work happening. I talked to Margaret Major the other day in Milford. She has a nonprofit organization that does mental health counseling. And of course, that was a huge concern during the pandemic. She was able to access a Government of Canada grant to be able to make sure that she was able to provide services in that way. I was the chair of the Rural Caucus in the governing party for the last 2 years. One of the programs that I'm very proud of is called the Canada Community Revitalization Fund. So think about all the small community halls across Kings-Hants that rely on fundraising to be able to make things happen. We introduced a program that's going to help support them. Darlene Fraser, for example, at the Hardwood Lands Hall, they're going to be ones that are going to receive money to help with upgrades to the hall because they weren't able to fundraise during the pandemic. So proud of the work that the government has done on that front.
Thank you. Thank you, Cody. Well, on to question number 3. Stephen, you'll be the lead on this one. Will your government support the Canadian Chamber of Commerce's call to introduce debt relief for small and medium enterprises, the SMEs, on COVID-related government-backed loans for SMEs in the hardest hit sectors? Please explain your reasons.
Absolutely. The NDP is extremely supportive of small businesses. We're not really on speaking terms with big corporations right now. And as a member of Parliament, one of my priorities would be to support small businesses without a doubt, including targeting those sectors that were most hit by COVID, and certainly locally, the retail sector, hospitality sector, tourism. This was reflected in the NDP's push in Parliament to get a 75% wage subsidy for eligible small businesses, and that's a reflection of our continued commitment to small and medium-sized businesses. I'm very much enthusiastic supporter of a basic income guarantee, and I'm supportive of that for small businesses, small business owners. So anytime there is a lull in business, difficulties in starting up, any kind of crisis, that there is a basic income from there for them to fall back on. Cody mentioned a number of different emergency benefit funds that came out, and those are needed, and they were passed through Parliament, and we got them out there. But if we had a permanent basic income guarantee, we wouldn't have to rush to all these subsidies. We would have a basic income for everyone, business owners, everyone, families, community members. So, but to address your question, I would certainly push my party to, yes, indeed, to be able to continue to provide funding for small businesses and to make sure they prosper, especially as we transition into a new green economy.
Thank you, Stephen. Sheila.
It's been very hard for small businesses. Restaurants and bars and retail have been very hard hit. Businesses have closed, and some of them have gone online. The restaurants have done takeout. But the bottom line is, if they don't survive through the pandemic, then they have to find other work. I know a shop opened up in Wolfville recently, and she sells linen, and she's closed because everything was on lockdown. So she's gone completely online. So we'll see if she survives going completely online. Our government, if the Green Party, when I go into Parliament is probably how I should say it, we would have 50% wage subsidies to help small businesses hire staff. We want a guaranteed livable income so that those that aren't employed can manage. We've seen it work with CERB, and we know that it can work. And so we'd like to see that it's continued. We would like to see entrepreneur help to encourage.
Thank you, Sheila. Cody?
Could you just repeat the question? It was around debt forgiveness, was it?
I can. Will your government support the Canadian Chamber of Commerce's call to introduce debt relief for small and medium enterprises, the SMEs, on COVID-related government-backed loans for SMEs in the hardest hit sectors? Please explain your reasons.
Sure. So first of all, we introduced the Canada Emergency Business Account, which was access up to $40,000 for small businesses. And we have a provision in that if $30,000 of payback within 2 years of taking the loan, $10,000 of it is free. When you ask the question, Stephen, I don't know if there's any party's platform right now that is suggesting complete debt forgiveness for any businesses that took on liquidity. Perhaps there is. But I want to highlight for those folks that might be watching at home that are business owners to talk about some of the supports that were in place and some of the things we're talking about. We had the wage subsidy. We had the rent subsidy that I know was extremely important to many retail businesses as well. We're proposing $2,500 in micro grants for small businesses that are working to adopt different uses of technology to be able to reach consumers. We had the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund, which was born from Rural Caucus to be able to work with some of our regional players that had specific needs, particularly around tourism. We're working to be able to reduce credit card fees. I talked to people like Rob Batara and Beth McDonnell here locally. That's really going to make a difference for them. And we're working on having an entrepreneur-style EI program such that if there was impacts to businesses, those individuals can take advantage of that. So those, I'm really proud of the record that our government has to be able to support individuals and businesses.
Thanks, Cody. Mark?
Thank you very much for the question. And certainly we're going to be offering debt relief, as was mentioned. It'll not be 100%, but we're looking at 25% debt relief, tax credit for small businesses up to $100,000 with our Main Street tax credit. We're looking at doubling the CEBA loan that was mentioned, the Canadian Emergency Business Loan, from $100,000 to $200,000. We're going to also introduce the Job Surge Plan to help small businesses hire new hires, and that will be somewhere between 25% to 50% covering the salaries of new hires to help businesses to hire people and maybe to pay a bit more to get them, because one of the other big problems that small businesses have had coming out of the pandemic, in the midst of the pandemic, is labor shortages. And that is in large part because we need to move out of the relief period that we are into a new job surge plan. And so we have, this is sort of the centerpiece for the Conservative Party to have all these programs to help with small businesses, both to get over the COVID, but also to take advantage of new opportunities in the future. And so these programs are going to be strengthened, increased, and they'll be there for small businesses.
Thank you, Mark. We're now moving on to question number 4, and Sheila, you'll get to go first on this one. How will your government invest to improve the broadband and cellular network within Kings-Hants so that businesses are able to operate without being limited to urban centers?
Okay, so the Green Party recognizes that to have Wi-Fi is almost the same as having electricity in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. It's essential for home businesses. It's essential for small businesses. It's essential for individuals to be on Wi-Fi. And if it's not available, then it's a real setback. So we would put in money to make sure that, and this has been said before by many governments, I know that they will ensure better connections for Wi-Fi. It's very important, and we recognize that for this area to grow, they need to have Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Thank you. Cody.
This, of course, Stephen, was a huge topic of concern amongst our rural caucus members, where I was the chair of the caucus. We pushed really hard within the government ranks to make sure that we had programs in place. Since forming government in 2015, we've put $8 billion towards rural broadband and connectivity. In the last parliament alone, that was just shy of $3 billion. Now, there's more work to be done, no doubt, but we've seen those investments right here with the Connect to Innovate program here in Kings-Hants. There's been other organizations through Develop Nova Scotia that have been beneficiaries. I was actually just down in Walton the other day. We were down to the pub and we were talking to someone that had just moved in actually from Halifax. They were so thrilled to be in the community. They were working remotely, and of course they were thrilled with everything that the Hants Shore has to offer. Those are the opportunities that exist for us in Kings-Hants. We're one of the most beautiful places to live in the world, but we need to make sure that we can help continue to connect individuals. I'd also point to low Earth orbiting satellites. Those are some of the opportunities with Telesat. The government has partnered there. Our government has put 10 times the amount of money towards broadband funding versus the Harper government. Thank you.
Thanks, Cody. Mark?
Thank you very much. When I was MLA, that was a push that we had on the provincial government, and that was we started that back in the year 2000, and I'm surprised and displeased that it's still not been achieved. And when I was out campaigning for my local MLA, John Lohr, there'd be houses right next to each other where one had high speed and the other didn't. And so the commitment of the Conservative Party of Canada is to have high speed for all Canadians by 2025. We're going to do this through increased accountability by the current internet providers. We're going to encourage competition and allow competition to come in order to bring prices down. And we're going to encourage innovation and investment because, as was mentioned, high-speed internet is the electricity of today. And as was done by Stanfield in Nova Scotia, the greatest prime minister Canada never had. He started the electrification process across Nova Scotia, and it's the same thing as we need to do with high-speed internet. We have companies, I have companies, bond rating company, for example, that rates across the world, companies across the world, countries, and it can only function with high-speed internet. And so this is the firm commitment of the Conservative Party to have high-speed internet in all rural communities by 2025.
Stephen?
Absolutely. Staying connected digitally is more essential than ever. And yes, too many rural areas, northern areas, Indigenous, First Nations communities simply don't have reliable cell or broadband service. So as part of our rural development strategy, as a part of our northern development strategy, as part of our services to Indigenous and First Nations communities, expanding broadband, expanding cell phone service is absolutely going to be absolutely essential. So we are looking at whenever we take government, is rolling that out without delay. We're one of the only parties that are pledging to put a cap on cell phone fees and internet fees because we realize people are paying too much. And we're also believe that government has to play much more role in providing these services, whether we're helping communities develop a cooperative basis to develop their own internet service provider, or whether it's governments directly get involved in helping to install Wi-Fi broadband access. So unlike the Conservative Party, which believes more competition will somehow increase services, we believe that right now the marketplace, the free market is not motivated to provide the services in these northern remote communities because they're simply not profitable. So there is a great need for government to step in and do what it can to provide these services in
Thanks, Stephen. Well, we're at the 1/3 mark. I know everybody's doing okay. Everybody's fine. Excellent. Question 5, and Cody, you get to start with question 5. The Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, CERB, was introduced to help employees who were negatively impacted due to COVID closures. As restrictions begin to lift, businesses are now desperate to rehire staff. Unfortunately, CERB is now having a negative effect in bringing employees back to work. What would your plans be to reduce and eventually remove this safety net to employees?
So thank you for the question, Stephen. And I remember being in Centerville about a year ago, and I went into a small bakery, and this woman was a sole proprietor. She ran the business herself. And she talked how passionately how the CERB was there to support her, to allow her to continue to open. And at that point, she wasn't selling as much baked goods and breads that she had normally been doing, but that support was allowing her to truly keep the lights on. When I look at when you mention employees, yes, employees, but also entrepreneurs and small business owners. Those supports have been in place. They've been crucial throughout the pandemic. I think you're right in saying that we need to be able to move away from them. We are at a point now in this province in Nova Scotia where we're leading the Federation in terms of getting back to what I would call the new normal. But when government goes to introduce these programs, you have to remember they're national in scope. And there was times during this pandemic that here in Nova Scotia, things were relatively strong, but there was complete shutdowns in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and other places. Our plan is to wind that down in October. We know that, of course, labor was a challenge before the pandemic. We need to have a robust immigration strategy in place to make sure that we can help continue to fill the labor needs of small business across this province.
Thank you, Cody. Mark.
Thank you very much for the question. It was interesting you talk about winding down CERB in October. I was just visiting a small business owner who runs a small framing company here in Elmsdale, Port of Elmsdale, and he was just incensed that CERB was extended to October, and he said, "This is just done. It's a buyout from Justin Trudeau because he can't get any workers." He says it's driving a black economy. And we're just over, my wife and I arrived here a little early. We decided we'd go over and get the Tim Hortons coffee, which everyone gets. They had a sign, we can't open the in-house food establishment because we don't have any workers. We popped over to another restaurant with the Silver Dart, and they said, "We're hiring, we can't find any workers." So we are moving out of the CERB period, which was good. I admit it was needed, and kudos for that. But what we need to do now is we need to move into helping businesses hire new people, and we're going to be doing that through the job search plan, paying for 50% of salary and wages, for a tax credit for small businesses, to retool, to build up, double the CBA loan, as I said. We're going to be requiring gig economies to help with CPP and EI benefits for portable employment savings plans. This is what we need to do. This is the stage we're at now. We're well positioned to show leadership on this file.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen?
Thanks for the question, Stephen. But I respectfully dismiss the whole premise of your argument here. I mean, this fits in with the overall mythology that somehow benefits stop people from working. We've used this on social welfare, employment insurance, and now it's applied to CERB. There's no research whatsoever to suggest that people are not going back to work because of CERB or employment choice. They're not going back to work because they don't want to have these crappy jobs with terrible wages. Would you go back and be a server at $12 an hour with a mask on, serving people who are not getting vaccinated? Don't you think that's a rationale why people aren't going back to work? Seriously? And you're blaming it on CERB? I understand it's the Chamber of Commerce and you're representing businesses, but the problem is much more complex than that. What we need to do is to address the underlying causes of why people make such lousy wages. Okay, maybe the businesses should start paying people a livable wage. We had the Weston Group, the most profitable company in Canada, raise wages for CERB, and as soon as the pandemic started to ease, they cut those wages back. And somehow you blame people for not going back to work because of CERB. So I reject the premise of the question. I think what we need to do is find more job training for people. We need to get better living wages, and we need to get these big corporations to start paying their employees a livable wage. People work 40 hours a week and are still living in poverty, and that's shameful.
Thank you, Stephen. Sheila, you get to close out this question.
Okay. So I read actually on a blog someone saying that she had taken the $2,000 CERB and she wasn't going back to work in her minimum wage job at $12.50, and she had moved on to something else. So that's good because she took time to retrain. I guess the issue is that people have had time to be at home and to think about what they want to do with their life and whether they want to go back and earn $12.50 an hour. Minimum wage should be at least $15 an hour. I'm a CCA, and I think we've been putting ourselves at risk. We didn't know whether we were going to get sick. We didn't know whether we were going to get the COVID-19. A lot of fear. And I remember saying, I'm not working at Northwood. And my son called me and said, you should take the $2,000 that the government's giving. And I said, well, I work in healthcare. That's what I do. And he said, well, if you have to, then you should carry on working, but you should leave it to the younger ones. He was quite insistent that I should take the 2,000. I think it's important that after the pandemic, that we look at a guaranteed livable income. We really need to see why people need to have a guaranteed livable income established.
Thank you, Sheila. Moving on to question number 6. This is where we get you with the second blow from question number 5. It is quite somewhat related to the previous question. And Mark, you're the lead on this question here, the first one. Could we transfer this financial support to employers to help increase the minimum wage disparity? What are your views on raising the minimum wage?
When I was Minister of Environment and Labor, we had big discussions about the minimum wage, and Nova Scotia was a leader in raising the minimum wage. I realize there are very complex arguments about whether raising the minimum wage increases employment or decreases employment, and there's economists on both sides. In the end, I decided as Minister of Labor and took the lead that it was a question of fairness and equity. And so we did that. However, we need to help small businesses as well. And so that's why I talked about the Canada Job Surge Plan, where we'll be providing 50% of the salary for up to 6 months for any new hires, 25% if they've just lost their job recently, 50% if they've been out of work for 6 months. This will help small businesses to be able to hire new people, to maybe increase wages if they so want to, in order to attract businesses, to attract employees. So it's a question of fairness. We need to pay a fair wage to people. One of the issues that comes in, two big issues that hopefully we'll get to, Stephen, that also affect this are housing prices, because they have a big play on whether you can afford to live on that wage, and inflation. And so hopefully we'll come back to those in time, because I'd like to speak to those as well. But absolutely, we'll be helping small businesses in this regard.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen, I think you've been waiting for this part.
Well, I think I may have answered your question in my previous answer, but yes, suffice it to say, our party is very much in favor of a livable wage. Now, on the issue of small and medium enterprises, I'm very, very cognizant that they do have, difficulty surviving, paying high wages and minimum wage. So as a party, we're definitely supportive of making sure that a higher minimum wage does not impact too much on the bottom line of small and medium enterprises. So, for example, we would look to cut back, for example, credit card processing fees, to cut back that expensive. We would like to see increasing labor tax credits to offset increases in minimum wage, for example. The Universal Pharmacare Program we're introducing will save companies that have to pay for extended health benefits enormous amount of money. So we're very sensitive to trying to ensure that small and medium enterprises don't go bankrupt or are able to pay a minimum wage, but not at the cost of their business. So once again, we're We're supportive of a livable wage, a minimum wage. We're supportive of small businesses, and certainly the idea of a basic guarantee that comes from the government would help supplement minimum wage, and this would come out of the pocket of the government and not of small businesses.
Thank you, Stephen. Sheila?
Okay, so when I left the NDP, it was because they said, I think it was Robert Chisholm who was the leader at the time, they couldn't support a $15 minimum wage because they didn't think the small businesses would be able to pay $15. So that meant the people that were working had to accept $12.50 an hour. And so then in order to pay for rent, mortgage, car, food, electricity, transportation, medical, telephone, they have to work 3 jobs at $12.50 an hour because they can't survive. And some of them even then have to go to the food bank. I guess if we're for the poor, then we need to raise the minimum wage. And how we do that is really a discussion, I guess. And it could be that the government chips in some money, or it could be that prices go up. And I know that particularly at the Wolfville Farmers Market, where I was a vendor, the people who are selling food, they say they can't put the prices up. So it has to be worked out, and maybe it's a provincial, a federal initiative, but the minimum wage at the moment you can't live on. Right?
Thank you, Sheila.
It used to be $15.
Thank you. Cody, wrapping up this question.
So ultimately, the provincial minimum wage is exactly that. It's provincial jurisdiction, but we do have a role to play federally. We've increased the federally jurisdiction up to $15 an hour. That's something that our government introduced. But this question really speaks to affordability and the work that government can do to help support lower income individuals. Sheila mentioned, for example, that she's a continuing care assistant, and part of our platform pledge is to be able to get the minimum wage for continuing care assistants up to $25 an hour. Now, I think we've had the opportunity to visit seniors' homes. We know how important the work that goes on in long-term care. That is something that I'm really proud of, and that's something I talk about when we're talking about healthcare. Canada Workers Benefit. This is a program that helps support working Canadians. We're planning to increase it by 1 million Canadians who could be eligible. That's up to $1,500 a year in savings that can help provide from the government. We're increasing the homeowners, first-time homeowners tax credit. That's another $2,000 that can help save. We've reduced income taxes for middle income and lower income Canadians. That was certainly in the first move in Parliament. We've increased the personal exemption, the point before you start paying taxes. That's extremely important for lower income workers and seniors. We've increased the guaranteed income supplement. This was something that we drove as a rural caucus. We have a lot of vulnerable seniors in Kings-Hants, and that's something I'm really proud of.
Thank you. Thank you, Cody. All right, we're at the halfway point. Everybody seems to be doing well. These are great questions. Question 7, and Stephen will be leading off responding. Canadians seem divided more than ever, with middle, upper class Canadians faring well through the pandemic, while newer Canadians, visible minorities, and less educated workers bore the brunt of the fallout. What would your government do to close the gap in inequality and inequity?
Well, many things I already mentioned. We believe in working with the provinces to raise minimum wage. We believe, in fact, in continuing the CERB in the post-pandemic weeks, because there's still a number of people, low-wage employees that cannot return to the workforce. But again, we have such inequality in this country that we can't keep nipping around the edges. Benefits here, index to inflation here, another benefit here. We need a fundamental change to how we deal with inequality in this country. And one of the first issues is basically levying higher taxes on the super rich. We've seen corporations profit from the pandemic. We've seen bank profits go through the roof, yet still paying tellers a basic minimum wage. So we need to, one of our policies is to levy a wealth tax on the super wealthy. We want taxes on the corporations should be raised. We believe very strongly in going after corporations that are evading taxes. Billions of dollars a year of taxes that go to healthcare, are being evaded by corporations. And most importantly, as I mentioned before, I think a fundamental way to address inequality in this country is a basic income guarantee, which would replace all the benefit programs, employment insurance, disability, OAS, and with one single payment that keeps everyone above the poverty line and addresses the rampant inequality of the 99% in this country.
Thank you, Stephen. Sheila.
I believe that we need to tax the corporations and the rich, and I believe that Walmart has very poor workers' rights. When my son was doing his master's in business administration, he was doing a group project on Walmart. So I sat him down and said, you do realize that if you get cancer and you work at Walmart, they put you on a program management and they move you out. So then not only have you got cancer, but you've lost your job and you don't have any benefits. So we in Nova Scotia are paying for those benefits for those people that Walmart aren't paying for. The government is paying for minimum wage. They're having to subsidize people with minimum wage. So we in Nova Scotia are paying for whatever those corporations or big multinational companies are not paying for. We need to make sure that we have a guaranteed livable income, and that would mean people on disability, seniors such as myself, single mothers, students, anyone who has any sort of federal or provincial money, that it would be one level guaranteed livable income. There isn't enough time. I could talk a long time on this one.
Oh, thank you, Sheila. Thank you. Cody?
So of course, this kind of comes to the affordability principle that we were just talking about. But if I could just quickly address the wealth tax, and we have taken on a number of measures as a government to be able to close tax loops. This is something we've been working on with CRA. But the idea of a wealth tax, I think, in and itself in Canada, without international partnership, I think is a recipe for disaster. I prefer to look at what has happened with Chrystia Freeland and the international cooperation around setting a minimum corporate tax. Those are the type of partnerships that are needed internationally, as opposed to going at it alone just as a country. But around the affordability piece, Stephen, one of the things that I think is extremely important is the $10 a day childcare that we've implemented with the provinces. We have eight provinces and territories. When you talk about inequality and making sure that people have access to quality daycare, this is something that is a huge plank in our platform. Of course, that runs in contrast to the tax credit model that the Conservative Party is pledging, but I'm very proud of this program. I'd also point to the $1 billion set aside over the next 5 years for the National Food and School Program. I think of people like Jenny Osborne and other advocates across Kings-Hants that are really pushing this. That's certainly important. The Canada Caregiver Benefit, $1,200 a year to help support those that are supporting their loved ones, and the CPP Survivors Benefit increase of 25%. Those are additional ones in addition to what I just mentioned that I think are extremely important.
Thank you, Cody. Mark?
Thank you very much. When I heard from my brother-in-law, who works in Ottawa with the federal government, that they were getting another holiday, it struck home to me how COVID has affected some people adversely compared to others. People who have federal jobs or provincial jobs, while they've had to deal with isolation, financially have not suffered. Other people, particularly young people, have suffered greatly. And so we have a plan for the gig economy, and that affects a lot of young people who are working in short-term jobs. They don't have pension, they don't have CPP, they don't have EI. We're going to be demanding that those companies provide CPP and EI in an employee portable plan. So they would have to pay into that. The employee would be able to take that with them to wherever they find employment. We will be helping with affordable housing, dealing with inflation. You remember Chrystia Freeland? She said, "Oh, there'll be no inflation. There'll be none." It was 3.5% last month. And so we need to get inflation under control. Affordable transit. We have a daycare plan that Cody mentioned. And minimum wage. We talk about minimum wage. I'm a little confused how minimum wage is a provincial responsibility, and yet somehow you can promise $25 to long-term care workers. It doesn't seem to add up. But nonetheless, we're going to be working hard to help with people who've been affected by COVID.
Thank you, Mark. On to question 8. There's been no fist fights or anything yet. This is pretty good. Some great answers so far. Sheila, you'll be leading off question 8. Indigenous concerns are at the forefront of news reports daily. How will you work with and support our local Indigenous community to achieve their goals?
Okay, we talked a lot about this on the way in, actually. I'm just going to find my piece of paper. We need to ask the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit what it is they want. We need to work with them to figure out what reconciliation means. You're going to be looking at what is a life worth, because you're trying to compensate people for murdered children and adults and missing and murdered Aboriginal women. And the government, what they will do is they'll appoint someone to come up with a sum that could be accepted. And my sense is that however much money is given to you, it never really compensates for the trauma you've been through, for what you've been through. We need to organize for them to have self-government. We need for them to have their own land. They need to have input into how we use their land. And they have to have input into child protection services and foster care. I've been a foster mother and I've looked after First Nations children. So the families have to feel like they have some power in this situation. They are in reserves, they are in poverty, and they cannot, sometimes they can't get out of that. I need more time.
Thank you, Sheila. Cody?
Ultimately, whoever's successful on this stage in about 11 days has the privilege of working with 3 Indigenous communities here in Kings-Hants, Inequity, Glooscap, and of course, Annapolis Valley First Nation. I've had the privilege of having a close working relationship with all 3 chiefs over the past 2 years. And so what I thought in my answer is I could talk a little bit about what we have in our platform that I think will be important for Indigenous communities across the country, but also talk about the work that I think needs to go on here in Kings-Hants. And so the biggest thing that I hear when I speak with our Indigenous leaders locally is the need for better housing on reserve. In our platform, we have $4 billion set aside over the next, I believe it's 3 years, to be able to address the housing concerns. When I talked to Mike Sack, we had a really important housing announcement around the Rapid Housing Initiative. 25 new units in Inequity, but of course, there's still a lot of wait list to be able to get into improved housing. We, of course, worked with Indigenous partners to be able to improve social and health outcomes on Indigenous communities as well, in terms of being able to allow those communities to take a partnership role. We are 15 minutes away from the site of the Inequity residential school system. And I think my work, what I was working on prior to this election, was to try to be able to move forward in a way that we can, through the eyes of the survivors, work to have a way to commemorate that site and to make sure that we can educate all Canadians about the impacts and the trauma that happened there. So those are some of the things that I would try to advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Mark?
Thank you very much for this question and for this very important issue. One of the things that the Conservative Party is committing itself to is swift action and funding to deliver on the Truth and Reconciliation calls, particularly on actions 71 to 76. We'll also be supporting the Indigenous communities, across Canada, the 3 that are mentioned in our particular riding of Kings-Hants, through extensive housing grants. But they'll be by Indigenous for Indigenous. We're not going to be telling them what sort of housing they have to, we're going to be, this is the money, you tell us what you need. So this will be Indigenous led and the housing units will be culturally appropriate. Mental health, we have in our platform, we've made this a key platform issue for all Canadians. 1 in 5 Canadians suffer mental health illnesses. The COVID has not made this easy at all, and our Indigenous communities are not exempt from this. And so there'll be $1 billion for mental health issues across Canada for Indigenous communities, used again by Indigenous for Indigenous. Because one of the things that we've seen too much of is the sort of paternalism. I will take care of you. I will do something for you. Our Indigenous people can stand on their own feet with the proper supports, financial supports that have been given. They know what's right for their communities, and we're going to listen to them, and what's going to be by Indigenous, for Indigenous going forward. We'll do the hard work rather than empty gestures.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen.
Well, certainly the overarching context is this, a government, federal government has to have a true nation-to-nation relationship with First Nations, reconciliation, recognition of Indigenous rights, equal funding. The NDP supports the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We support the Truth and Reconciliations and implementing all 94 calls, implementing all the recommendations of the inquiry of murdered and missing Indigenous women. But there's, two sort of glaring examples that show how even when the courts or human rights tribunals decide in the favor of Indigenous people, government still gets in their way. Indigenous fishing is probably the best example. I'm very strong supporter of Indigenous fishing. The NDP is. We have to respect their constitutional right to fish for a moderate living. Even after the courts decided on that, we still have the government undecided on what exactly is a moderate living. DFO is getting in the way of their lobster fishing. And it's the same with Human Rights Tribunal. 10 years ago, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal decided in favor of Indigenous children that the federal government would discriminate against, both on and off reserve. That was a national decision. And yet, for whatever reason, the federal government is blocking this in court, is taking it to court. Why? Why is this? So every step forward Indigenous people takes, it seems like the government blocks that step and tries to take them 2 steps back. So we need to respect the court's rights, and we need to respect the.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Thank you. Okay, that's eight questions down. Question number 9, and Cody will be the lead on question number 9, going first. How can Kings-Hants fully embrace a green economy, and how will your government support that transition?
Sure. So I think we're well positioned here in Kings-Hants to do exactly as you say, Stephen, is to be able to drive forward. And this, for me, was the number one issue that I heard on the doorsteps in 2019. People in this riding want a member of parliament and a government that is serious to be able to act on climate change. And some of the initiatives I would point to the listeners here today is around the home energy retrofit program, where you can access up to $40,000 interest-free and to be able to make investments in your home to reduce emissions, but of course help on savings as well around energy costs. We put a $5,000 rebate in place for individuals that were making those same retrofits to their home. I look at Wolfville, for example. We had a PACE program, which is the property assessed clean energy program, where individuals can borrow to be able to make those investments. We know how important agriculture is here in Kings-Hants. We had hundreds of millions of dollars in the budget to be able to address ways in which farmers can be able to reduce emissions on farm, but also use carbon sequestration as a way, through soil health, as a way to help environmental outcomes. So there is a lot there. If you are watching here tonight and environment and climate change is an important issue, I would point, I'm not a climate scientist nor a climate economist, but if you look nationally, people are pointing to the Liberal plan as being the strongest amongst the parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Mark.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And this goes back to the past when you worked with HRM and I was the environment minister. We brought in the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act, a trend-setting act across Canada and beyond. And thank you for your work in that regard. The Conservative Party of Canada is supportive not just of a green economy, but of greening the economy. And I always have to remind people we need to do both, a green economy and greening of the existing economy. We'll be doing it through launching a personal low carbon savings account. I could speak more about that if we had time. It's a very innovative approach. I wish I'd thought of it when I was Minister of Environment. Introducing zero emission vehicle standards similar to BC's, incentives to agriculture and fishery to help with carbon sequestration, protection of wetlands. We'll streamline the land-based offset credits so that farmers and forestry people get prioritized science-based conservation for fisheries, strengthen the National Aquatic Invasive Species Program. And this is one that's near and dear to my heart because I was involved with John Baird in setting up and the first marine protected area. And we're going to make sure these marine protected areas continue and are focused on sustainability of our key fish stocks. I could go on and on about this subject like Sheila's lamenting, but I'll end there.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen.
Well, without a doubt, the crisis climate is the greatest crisis we're facing right now. It's the greatest existential threat we have. And I think there's merits to all four party platforms, without a doubt. Ideally, I like to see in Parliament all four of these parties work together and come up with a comprehensive, ambitious climate plan. There's strengths and weaknesses, all of them. Cody has rightfully said that the Liberal plan has some strong points to it. It also has some weaknesses. The continued subsidies to oil, the fossil fuel industry. A recent study just came out showing that we need to keep at least 60% of all fossil fuels in the ground in order to make our climate change target. So I'm not, the NDP has a platform, it has its strengths, it has its weaknesses. Our goal is a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below 2005 levels by 2030 and zero emissions by 2050. We have a number of strategies to reach that, including ending the subsidies to fossil fuel, including greening our economy, including continuing the national carbon pricing, addressing the big polluted emitters. But I think the most important thing here is that we've got to get on with this. We can't keep making promises. We've got to make our targets. Emissions are going up in this country. We don't know how much they went up in 2020, but I would plead with all four parties in Parliament to work together, combine your strategies, and act now to address this crisis.
Thank you, Stephen. Sheila.
Okay. So the Green Future, you should read the 2021 platform of the Green Party. Canada has the chance of a lifetime. If we can combine the determination and ambition of the people of Canada with real political will and leadership, Canada can become a global leader in limiting climate change and in creating one of the most competitive green economies of the world. So climate change is already here. We've seen the flooding in New York. We've seen fires in British Columbia. What we need to do is cut the emissions of coal, gas, and oil, the carbon by 2030 by half, and by 2050 we need to be down to net zero. The IPCC report says that we're on red alert. We can't wait to do this. We have to do it now. Everybody has to work together. Municipal, provincial, federal, businesses, I'd like to say corporations, but they seem to get out of everything. And individuals have to work together to get our carbon emissions down to zero. We need to green our economy. We have a plan. We're going to have a climate act, and we will actually set targets and we will meet them. We're not playing around.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you. Okay. See which question. Question 10. And Mark, you'll be the lead, first one to go on question 10. How important do you think balancing the budget is, and how will you achieve and when?
One of the reasons I ran, there are many different reasons. One was since that I'd lost pride in being a Canadian, and it bothered me, and I wondered why. And I realized I'd not heard the Prime Minister of Canada say anything good about our country in a long time. But the other reason was when the Prime Minister's budget office came out saying, all things being equal, the budget won't begin to be balanced till 2070. And I looked at my grandson's picture, my oldest grandson, and I said, they're not even going to begin looking at balancing the budget until 2070. He will be my age then. Am I going to burden him with that? I have spent in my work as a MLA and Minister of Environment, I've spent my emphasis and focus on the environment, passing on to young people sustainable environment, but you can't have a sustainable environment without a sustainable economy as well. And so I'm not going to burden my grandchildren, your grandchildren. Our party's not going to burden your grandchildren. We're going to balance the budget within 10 years. The CBC did a report, the fact check they have on whether this can be done, this promise by the Conservative Party, and they said it could be done. And that was by the CBC. And so that's our commitment in 10 years to balance the budget so that our grandchildren, our children have a good economy and a good future.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen.
Well, we're in unprecedented times that requires a significant amount of public investment and public funding. And none of the parties are promising to balance the budget anytime soon. If we were to balance the budget in 10 years, that would have catastrophic effects on our society. You look back to the 1990s when Paul Martin was finance minister and wielded his knife in austerity, and we still have especially taking, for example, CMHC, the federal government of housing, we still are feeling the repercussion of that. We had a massive increase in homelessness. So I appreciate the issue of balancing the budget. I've been in debt all my life, and I'll be in debt until I die. I'll have a mortgage till I die. And so I understand what it's like to be in debt and paying off debt. I paid off my student loan in a timely manner, basically by living in hovels for 5 years after I graduated. So I understand what it's like to be in debt, and I understand the importance in paying off debt, but not at the expense of increasing inequality in the country and the basic standard of living. I mean, we already have far too many people living in poverty. If we try to balance the budget in such a short period of time, inevitably that's going to fall on the most marginalized and disadvantaged people in society. So yes, I agree we need to find ways to balance the budgets, but not on the backs of working people or poor people. Maybe it's about time the corporations and the wealthy started paying their fair share to balance the budget.
Thank you, Stephen. Sheila.
It's very important to balance the budget. I personally can't spend more money than I have. So if you take it down to the micro level, that's how most families are. You can take out mortgages, you can take out loans, but you have to be able to pay them back. And if you can't, then you can't have it, right? So it's very important to balance the budgets, but we need to provide green jobs for our youth. We need to keep our youth here in East-Hants. We need to retrofit homes so seniors can stay in their homes. We need to provide green energy, solar and wind power. We need to put money into affordable housing. And my official agent's a student. He's very, very keen on having loans forgiven because he says that how can you start work and how can you get a mortgage and how can you get a loan to start your business if you've got this huge student loan? So I encouraged him to write a question for tonight. I don't know if it went through, but I know during the pandemic, the students couldn't get jobs. I have 3 students in my home. I board international students from Acadia University, and they couldn't get jobs in the summer. So I was leaving them food. They didn't have the money required to feed them. It's very important that we balance the budget, but we don't leave people starving.
Thank you, Sheila. Cody.
I think certainly it's always important, but I think what we need to remember coming into the pandemic is Canada had a very strong fiscal position. We had the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. Mark, of course, kind of paints a picture that the government would not get back to 2070. The Parliamentary Budget Office suggests that by 2025, 2026, assuming no new government spending, which of course all the parties are talking about new spending, there would be a balance in about 4 or 5 years. But at the same time, you need to be able to have the economic growth to outpace any type of the government debt that is taken on. And what Mr. O'Toole has said is that there would be cuts to the CBC, for example, that the childcare agreements and the early education agreements that were in place with the provinces and territories would be taken away. My understanding is it might also include the Canada Child Benefit. And so the 10-year plan, although is quite vague, certainly is signaling that there's going to be some very important fundamental cuts to social programming that is tied to economic growth. We have to get more women back to work. You know, the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women. When I talk to young families, the cost around childcare and early education is quite high. We want to be able to have that policy as a driver to help get people back to work. The economic opportunities that come from that will help make the spending that has taken on during the pandemic more sustainable. But yeah, it is concerning to me what Mr. O'Toole is saying on some of those fronts.
Thank you, Cody. Question 11, which Stephen will be the first to respond to, was also asked at the provincial candidates debate, as well as a very important question for seniors in East Hants. The question is, East Hants has a large seniors population, as do many Nova Scotia communities. What are the top 3 things your party will do to ensure affordable and accessible housing and health care benefits for seniors, including mental health resources?
Well, some of the promise we're making to seniors and all Canadians, first of all, is a Pharmacare program. This is universal Pharmacare, universal coverage for prescription drugs and medical equipment, medical devices. Many seniors do have coverage through provincial plans, but there's many gaps in that. We would fill that. Far too many seniors still live in poverty, and because of that, they're paying out of pocket for a number of things they shouldn't be paying out of pocket for, including prescription drugs and medical devices. So first and foremost is the Pharmacare program. We're also proposing a national senior strategy that will work with provinces, territories, and Indigenous governments to make seniors healthcare a priority, including addressing dental care as well, including building more long-term facilities, but most importantly, trying to keep them in the home. We want to be able to obviously build more housing, and our particular focus is on affordable housing. So we want to be able to target groups in society, young people, Indigenous people, marginalized people, seniors on fixed income to be able to buy affordable housing. And that's not necessarily market housing. So we want to be able to provide more government housing, more social housing, more government subsidized housing, and more cooperative housing to be able to target groups like seniors who are on fixed income. So while the market-based housing will always be the dominant housing stock, we feel that the government needs to get more involved, providing affordable housing for seniors.
Thank you, Stephen. Sheila.
Okay, so I'm a senior, I'm 72, so I have CPP and OAS. I also work, so I'm CCA, and I have 3 students. So I need Pharmacare. If I don't have 3 students and I don't work, I wouldn't be able to afford to live in my house, I'm sure. And we heard it when we went to see the seniors that one of the women said when her husband died, she couldn't live in a house. And now she's renting it to a bus driver. The biggest issue is that you're on a fixed income and there's no way that you can actually increase that income. The Green Party of Canada wants to have a national dementia care because in the next 10 years, people like me, I was born in 1949. I'm just my older sister, she was born in 1947. So we are coming through and I need, and my friend who's 80, Madeline, she needs long-term care pretty soon. So we need to have different options available for seniors. I was working on co-housing and multi-generational housing. It needs to be affordable. So sometimes when they say affordable, it's $828. A lot of seniors can't afford that.
Thank you, Sheila. Cody.
So I first want to start on what the government has done. So you'll recall that it was the Conservative Party that had increased old age security before you were able to be eligible to 67. The first move the government did was bring that back down to 65. We increased the guaranteed income supplement, which is available for some of the most vulnerable seniors across the country. That brought 250,000 seniors out of poverty in the last parliament alone. We've increased the personal exemption, the amount before you start paying taxes. That's particularly important for lower income seniors. And we've increased the old age security by 10% for those seniors that are over 75. That equals $3 billion a year in continued spending that we're committing to because we know it's going to be extremely important for seniors. But what are we going to do? What are we pledging in the platform? We're pledging to increase the CPP survivors benefit by 25%. I've had many conversations in my constituency office about how important this policy could and will be. The guaranteed income supplement, we're pledging to increase that by $500 for individuals, $750 for couples. I want to point you to our long-term care investments. Those are going to make for seniors as they age. The caregivers benefit, our housing platform, which has specific elements towards seniors. And I know that we might get a question around inflation. I just want to mention that the Bank of Canada projected that there would be an inflation increase because of the deflationary pressures during the pandemic. We expect that to soften out in the days ahead.
Thank you, Cody. Mark?
I'm glad that inflation was mentioned, because for seniors, people on fixed income, inflation is a direct cut to their income. And that's why we have to move towards balancing the budget in order to get inflation under control. And I need to mention, in response to a comment that was made, that the Conservative Party platform is no cuts. We will be able to balance the budget with no cuts within 10 years. The CBC looked at this and said, is this possible to do it without cuts? Every time the Liberal Party gets in trouble, as it is now, they start to demonize the Conservative Party and put out these falsehoods. And the commitment is no cuts. But we need to get inflation under control. Other things that we're going to be doing for seniors, we're introducing a seniors tax care benefit. That's $200 per month for anyone who is able and willing to live at home and look after their senior, 70 years old. You'd like that one, Sheila? It would help you out. If someone's staying there, they'll be eligible for $200. We're going to double the home accessibility. Well, not double. The home accessibility tax credit will be per person, not per dwelling. And we're going to not enact tax on the sale of the family home, as is rumored that Mr. Trudeau wants to do.
Thank you, Mark. That's 11 tough questions that you've had. The question number 12, which Sheila will lead off on, just a tiny bit on the lighter side, I think. Candidates, please give an example of a project you have worked on in the past that you felt passionate about.
Oh, well, I guess mine was childcare. We set up, Thelma Edwards and myself and Peggy Mahone in Pictou County. We set up family home childcare, and we did a feasibility study. And we approached 4 ministers, community services ministers. Marie Deckman, she said, we want to subsidize spaces. And she said, do you expect the province to pay for that? And we were out of the door within 10 minutes. Guy Leblanc, he was French. He listened. I asked him how long we had to present, and he listened, and nothing. Trying to think who the next one was. I can't remember. The last one was Rolly Thornhill. He actually was a Conservative, a Red Tory, and he gave us 10 subsidized spaces. It's very hard, but it's very hard to actually have to work for 4 years to get 10 subsidized spaces when there are 60% of women in the workforce that need childcare. Or it's maybe 60% of women that have children that need childcare. So there has to be a better way.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. Cody.
I'll give you an initiative that if someone was to ask me on the street, what am I most proud of in my 2 years as member of parliament? Because of course I'm proud of the work that I did before I got into this role. But we know how important fire halls are in Kings-Hants, particularly in communities actually across Canada. But in small places like Walton, Halls Harbour, Scotts Bay, Maitland, those men and women that volunteer are extremely important to our communities, not just to respond to fires, but they're also responding to motor vehicle accidents, emergencies, whatever the case may be. They are truly our community leaders. For the longest time, when the federal government would transfer money to municipalities through the gas tax fund, fire hall infrastructure was excluded. And that's not necessarily a problem if you're sitting in downtown Toronto or downtown Halifax. But if you're one of those volunteer firefighters in a small community in Kings-Hants, you have to do a lot of fundraising to be able to pay for the infrastructure and the equipment that's required to respond. It took over a year and a lot of explaining to civil servants in Ottawa that actually some of these services are provided entirely by volunteers. But as in my role as the caucus, the rural caucus chair, we were able to get changes in this year's budget that is going to allow municipalities to allocate gas tax funds to those very important organizations. It's a very small change amongst many of the important things we've talked tonight, but I know it's something that I did over the past 2 years, and I'm very proud of it.
Thank you, Cody. Mark?
Thank you very, very much. And I don't know why when you asked the question that my mind went to food. And maybe it's because I live in an agricultural district, maybe because it's that time of night. But the three things all tied to food. One is Farm Works with Linda Best. I was on the board to help encourage people to buy local food production, and that's so important to our farmers. And so Farm Works has increased and grown, and local food. The food bank, I was on the food bank, the Canning and District Lions member for Canning, and the food bank that we have done with the help of the Interchurch Agency has been instrumental in helping a lot of people through tough times. And then the breakfast program at our local school, and again through the Interchurch Relief Council. So all these programs all center around food. And there have been things that I've been involved with as a church minister and as a citizen in the area, and it feels good to be able to help.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen?
I guess what I'm most proud of is a program I developed called PALS, which stands for Positive Role Models and Mentors, Academic Tutoring, Leisure and Physical Activity, and Social and Life Skills Development. It is a program developed for at-risk kids, where kids come on a campus and get tutored and mentored by St. Mary's students and Dalhousie students as well. That began in 2006, actually a grant from the Conservative government at the time. Stockwell Day personally presented, although he didn't show up on a CEDU at that time. But anyways, the kids that were in this program are now in their late teens, early 20s. We had 2 kids out of the program, twins, that came from a very toxic environment, nonverbal, aggressive, way below academic grade level. And within 3 years' time, they made such progress that their mother actually asked my wife and I to be their godparents. And the boy now is a student at St. Mary's, and he's a starting safety on the football team and an academic, doing very well academically. So the point I want to make is that the greatest investment we can make in society is investing in kids, especially at-risk kids. That is the greatest investment and the greatest return that we can see in society.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, that's the questions. And each candidate has 2 minutes for closing comments, remarks. And I've just been given the order for these statements. And Sheila, you'll be going first, followed by Stephen, Mark, and Cody.
So I'm Sheila Richardson. I'm Green Party of Canada candidate for Kings-Hants. We're in a climate emergency. The Green Party would like to bring in a Climate Change Act. We would halve carbon emissions from coal, oil, and gas by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Canada spends $3.3 billion on fossil fuel subsidies. This would educate 260,000 students, provide a hospital bed for 16 million days, or retrain 330,000 workers. To grow a sustainable and prosperous green economy, Green MPs will develop a Sustainable Generations Fund to invest in green training for the trades, apprenticeships, and education facilities. We'd create targeted national infrastructure investments in renewable and efficient energy production, digital upgrades, clean tech manufacturing, and ecotourism. Incentivize homeowners to update their appliances to energy efficient solutions through an expanded home renovation tax credit. Invest in our tourism industries, which contribute more to GDP than mining, telecommunications, and food manufacturing. Fund community-supported agriculture, farmers markets, small-scale farms and producers, and the wineries and microbreweries that Canadians love. Establish green worker training programs that teach fossil fuel workers the renewable energy industries. We'd like to provide affordable housing. So I urge you to vote Elections Canada office, or vote at the advance poll, or vote on Monday, 20th of September, 2021. I'd like to say vote green, but you're free to choose whoever you want.
Thank you, Sheila. Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen. The pandemic has taken a toll on Canadians. The responses that were most successful in addressing the pandemic and its many direct and indirect repercussions in Canada and in Nova Scotia in particular, I think strongly reflect the progressive values and the principles of the NDP. The importance of people banding together to protect our collective welfare and to make personal sacrifices for the cause of the greater good, our commitment to a universal public healthcare system, the importance of an activist government, and the need to put in place measures that protect the most vulnerable in society who are disproportionately bore the brunt of COVID. These are the values that help make Nova Scotia the envy of not just Canada, but the world in combating the pandemic and keeping our COVID numbers low. These are my values. These are the values of the NDP. And I think these are the values that we need to move forward to truly achieve a green, equitable, just, and prosperous future for all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Mark.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you, Stephen. I want to thank the East-Hants and District Chamber of Commerce and the Laker News for sponsoring this event, and all you who are listening tonight. And Pat was telling me the one done last night, you got more listeners the day after. So those of you who are listening the day after this debate, thank you for listening and participating in this. I want to thank the fellow candidates for putting their time and their lives and having been in politics before, as Cody. I know the sacrifice that this takes. I hope you have a fuller understanding of the choice that you will make either in advanced polling on election day. I believe that the Conservative Party, which I represent, has the best policies for East-Hants and District. Policies such as the Canada Job Surge plan to help Canadians find good employment, the Main Street plan to help businesses thrive and grow once again. One that wasn't mentioned, but the setting aside of federal infrastructure funds, which we promised to set aside about 15% for rural areas, instead of letting it be gobbled up by Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. Increased support for healthcare, support for agriculture, and protecting our supply managed system of agriculture, which was nibbled away at in a trade agreement that the Liberal Party made. It's so essential to this riding. Supply management is key to the health agricultural East-Hants. So the alleviation of a housing crisis, which we've talked about through the construction of new homes and support for more rental units, innovative programs. 1/8 of the Conservative platform is to help with environmental issues, which may surprise some of you and which pleases me greatly. But along with these policies, I pledge to you, as my past history as MLA for 10 years for the riding of Kings North, I pledge to you that my number one focus will be to represent the riding of Kings-Hants to Ottawa and not Ottawa to Kings-Hants. And for that reason, I would covet your support on Election Day.
Thank you, Mark. Cody.
Well, I'll echo my thanks to the East-Hants Chamber of Commerce and all of you for watching in here tonight. It's important for us to be able to engage on these important topics. My predecessor, Scott Bryson, in his last speech in the House of Commons said, politics matters. And in my work as a member of parliament, I'm proud of my record as one of the youngest members of parliament in the House. And what I have tried to be is two things. You have to be many things to many people, but I've particularly tried to be an advocate for small business and for agriculture, which is the backbone of our economy here in Kings-Hants. We've talked tonight about the importance of many different subjects, but the 5 that I wrote down are this: healthcare. Although we know it's a provincial jurisdiction, we have a role to play federally, and I would point you to our Liberal platform around long-term care, around increasing access to primary doctors and virtual care, and mental health. Housing. We have the strongest housing plan to be able to make sure that there's a roof over someone's head. We know that that is a challenge right now across the country and indeed in Nova Scotia. Reconciliation. We mentioned 3 Indigenous communities here in Kings-Hants, but indeed across the country. No government has done more to advance the issues around reconciliation, but there's more work to be done. Climate change and environment. Again, number one issue on the doorsteps in 2019 continues to be an important aspect moving forward. Our government has the most credible plan. As your member of parliament, I will specifically focus on how we can work with our agriculture sector to reduce emissions and make sure that we set them up for success in the days ahead. And our economic recovery. We're here at the Chamber of Commerce debate talking about how important small business is to our record. I'm proud of our platform that the Liberal Party has put forward. I'm proud of the work that I've done over the past 2 years. I want to bring my energy, my efforts, and everything I can to the table to continue to serve the people of Kings-Hants, and I humbly ask for your support.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Cody. I'd like to ask Pat Healy to come up with some closing remarks. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you, candidates, for giving us your time tonight and hopefully providing Kings-Hants residents a better understanding of what you can do for our communities. Thank you to the East Hants Chamber of Commerce for helping to organize this. Matt for coming, Stephen for being the moderator. Before we end tonight, I want to be a bit serious. We have all likely seen on TV and on social media the videos of the violence directed at Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and that of journalists covering his campaign. That is not okay. No politician, regardless of their party and their campaign staff, nor the journalists covering them, they do not deserve to have the violence or threats directed at them, as have been seen over the past week or two. The way to make your voices heard is not by those scenes that we have seen, but by using pencil and paper and voting your choice who you think can lead Canada. That's how you get your message across. Advanced polls start tomorrow, Friday, September 10th, and go until September 13th. And then Election Day is on September 20th. Make sure to mark that X on your ballot for the candidate that you feel can do the job best. We have 4 great candidates here tonight, as we have heard. Please get out and vote. It's our privilege that we can get the opportunity to vote. Make it count. Thanks for watching, and good night from the Holiday Inn at the Halifax Stanfield Airport.